The section on Europe is very much about getting involved in our politics. He talks about the security strategy, talks about how we're facing civilizational erasure and how there's a kind of cultural civilizational suicide taking place in Europe, and how they need to support, patriotic parties that are creating a cultural resistance.
Is the Trump administration trying to break the European Union? According to reports from a still classified version of the US national security strategy, the US are trying to persuade 4 more countries to leave the Union to make Europe great again. The 4 countries seen as targets to follow Brexit are Austria, Hungary, Italy and Poland. Mark Leonard is founder and director of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Mark, good evening to you.
Evening.
How vulnerable is the EU bloc right now?
I think that what we're seeing is a situation where people are in a real bind, because on the one hand, we have a desperately serious security situation with Russia having brought war to the European continent, and Europeans depend a lot on American protection at the moment and don't have the full capabilities to defend Ukraine and themselves. But at the same time, this national security strategy shows that a central part of Trump and his MAGA regime's goals is about getting involved in European politics and pushing back against a lot of the governments, pushing for regime change in countries like the UK and Germany and France, core countries in the European continent. And that is pretty unprecedented, and people are quite shocked by the sort of brazen way that goal has been made clear in this security strategy.
It is definitely a huge shift in American foreign policy. Is it a dangerous shift?
I think there is a sort of internal contradiction in the national security strategy, because on the one hand, part of what Trump is talking about is putting America first, and the core idea behind it is about recalibrating American policies. So, there are 4 sort of core parts of the Trump revolution, which are about moving away from an open border on migration, moving away from free trade, becoming much less active in the world than America has been beforehand, and smashing up the administrative state in America. And part of the national security strategy talks about this new doctrine of not getting involved in other countries' internal affairs and focusing on America first. But the section on Europe is very much about getting involved in our politics. He talks about the security strategy, talks about how we're facing civilizational erasure and how there's a kind of cultural civilizational suicide taking place in Europe, and how they need to support patriotic parties that are creating a cultural resistance to this course. Some of it is about the interests of big American companies. So there's a lot about free speech and a real pushback on attempts to regulate big tech companies. And you can see, how they're trying to support Elon Musk and to help these big companies break free from regulation. But it is quite weird on the one hand to talk about how America's not going to interfere in other countries' internal affairs, and at the same time talk about how they want to support often far-right parties, some of which have got very, very dubious democratic credentials across the continent, rather than working with the governments that are in power, who are firm American allies.
Look, we also understand that there are suggestions of creating a new elite C5 or Core 5 forum of world powers to sideline the G7. Russia famously wants back in the G7, doesn't it? That was discussed between, or has been discussed between, Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. So this new C5, Core 5 group of nations would be America, China, India, Japan and Russia. Would that completely disrupt the world order?
Look, I think what we're seeing is the end of the world order that took shape after the end of the Cold War. and a lot of the institutions which are at the heart of that world order are on the back foot and are very much riven by geopolitics. So people are meeting in different formats. We're seeing the coalition of the willing emerging in Europe. You're seeing much more talk between like-minded countries on the G7, like Canada and Japan, who are working very closely with other European countries. It's fine for the US to meet with whoever they want. Donald Trump has talked about, recreating the G8, and in the 28-point peace plan on Ukraine, there is talk about bringing Russia back into the G8. It is weird to think about having bodies to kind of govern the world without Europeans in it, given that, the European Union is a much larger economy, 10 times the size of Russia's. So it is a bit odd leaving it out. And given the rearmament that's taking place in Europe, even if you look at it in military terms, it's a strange omission from his idea. But I don't think that's a very like-minded group, though, that group of 5 countries. So they might meet, but I'm not sure that they're going to be running. It'll be a committee to run the world.
Yeah, and look, there is contradiction in there in having America and China among those groups, and India as well. There are clashes in there. Mark Leonard, really good to speak to you. Thanks for your wisdom. Founder and director of the European Council on Foreign Relations. Now, Ukraine has handed over its updated peace plan to the United States, with Volodymyr Zelensky saying any territorial concessions would need to be put to a referendum. The Ukrainian president said the proposal would include security guarantees and that the US had discussed a free economic zone in the Donbas region from which troops would withdraw. The NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte spoke earlier today about the worrying threat of a third world war if negotiations don't go to plan.
If Putin got his way, Ukraine under the boot of Russian occupation, it would require a truly gargantuan shift in our deterrence and defence. Russia has brought war back to Europe, and we must be prepared for the scale of war our grandparents and great-grandparents endured. It is a terrible thought. But if we deliver on our commitments, this is a tragedy we can prevent.
Well, let's speak to David Lawler, National Security Editor at Axios, who have had really good access to the peace deal and its various iterations. David, it's great to have you with us again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Let's take a look at what Volodymyr Zelensky has said, what we know about territorial concessions. Just talk to us about this idea of creating a free economic zone. What do we understand about it?
Yeah, that's right. So this is the same old dispute we've been talking about for a couple of weeks, which is Russia demanding and the U.S. backing this demand that they not only continue to occupy the areas of Ukraine that they currently hold, but they get an additional piece of territory to complete their hold on the Donbas region in the southeast of Ukraine. So the latest U.S. proposal, according to Zelensky, is that Russia would not actually move into that zone when Ukraine pulls out. There would be no Russian troops, no Ukrainian troops, and it would be sort of a demilitarized zone, a free economic zone, I guess is the U.S. phrasing on it. Zelensky had some significant qualms with that. He said, for one thing, if we pull our troops out, how do we actually ensure that Russia doesn't just move its troops in? For the second concern, who actually governs this area?
Who actually belong? I mean, who owns the zone then, I suppose, is the question.
Right, exactly. I mean, Russia would certainly. So this has been one of their core demands from the beginning, that they've annexed this piece of Ukraine, that this will be part of Russia under any peace deal. So from their perspective, I'm sure they would call it Russian. The original U.S. plan said the U.S. would recognize that claim by Russia, but Ukraine would not have to under its law. So there's a bit of a, de jure versus de facto question there. I haven't seen this updated plan, so I don't know if it states whether this would be formally part of the Russian Federation in the eyes of the U.S. It seems like they're trying to find a way to square a circle where Ukraine says this is totally unacceptable, but Russia says we won't sign a deal unless it's included. And so the U.S. is trying to get creative with how to make that work for both sides.
And this would be the whole of the Donbass, would it?
It would. So Russia currently holds something like 86% of the Donbas region, but there's still, I mean, it's quite a big region. Ukraine is quite a big country, so that's still a lot of territory that would then be in this kind of limbo in between. Ukraine would not control it militarily; they would pull back. Russia wouldn't move in. It's still quite a bit of territory that has been scarred by war for sure. But Ukraine certainly says we're not going to give up land that we haven't lost, that our army still holds. So that seems to be the biggest sticking point between the U.S. and Ukraine at the moment.
What else are you being told about this reversion peace deal?
So the security guarantees are the other big aspect of this that have been discussed and debated back and forth, back and forth. They've given each other different ideas. Zelensky said today that the U.S. security guarantees would go to Congress. So presumably he's saying we insist on this being a Senate ratified treaty, which does have quite a bit more force than just a piece of paper with Donald Trump's signature on it. So they're trying to codify this in a more legally binding way, they being the Ukrainians there. Of course, the Russians came out today and said both sides need security guarantees that are binding. So what does that mean? What are the security guarantees that the U.S. could provide Russia? I suppose it's a guarantee that Ukraine won't attack them again. But, this is another issue where the U.S. and Ukraine are negotiating it back and forth, but Russia has a vote too. So they might agree amongst themselves and present it to the Russians, and the Russians might say no thanks. So and I'm not sure where we're going to land on the security guarantees issue.
Yeah, David, it's great to speak to you again. Thank you, David Lawler, National Security Editor at the news website Axios. Just to give you an update, you will hear a lot this weekend, actually, as many leaders, world leaders, Donald Trump, Ukraine and also European nations focus heavily on trying to keep this deal going. The Prime Minister, our Prime Minister, is expected to meet the Belgian PM in Downing Street tomorrow. The issue of frozen Russian assets and releasing those to fund Ukraine's war effort will be the hot topic of conversation there. We know that French and German and British national security advisors will meet US aides Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner. That's expected to be over the weekend alongside Ukrainian officials. Keir Starmer's due in Berlin on Monday night for further Ukraine talks, and on it goes. So expect to keep hearing about this.